Hello, everyone. Welcome to City Lights Live, the official online version of the City Lights Bookstore events calendar. I am your host, Peter Maravellis, and tonight, City Lights, in conjunction with our friends at Duke University Press, celebrate the publication of Black Girl Autopoetics, Agency in Everyday Digital Practice. It's by Ashleigh Greene Wade, and it's published by Duke University Press. Professor Ashleigh Greene Wade explores the ways in which young Black women create representations of themselves in digital culture. She explores the current explosion in creativity and inventiveness, taking advantage of the speed and flexibility enabled by smartphones, and considers how Black girls' digital production contributes to a broader archive of Black culture and life. Dr. Wade draws a complex picture of how Black girls navigate contemporary reality, urging us to listen to their experience and learn from their techniques of survival. Before we begin, as is customary at the outset of each event, I would like to take this moment to acknowledge that we are beaming to you from the unceded ancestral homelands of the Ohlone peoples. I would like to take this moment to offer respect to those who have come before us as stewards of the land. Dr. Ashleigh Greene Wade is Assistant Professor of Digital Studies, jointly appointed in Media Studies and African American Studies at the University of Virginia. Her work traverses the fields of Black girlhood studies, digital and visual media studies, Black feminist theory, and digital humanities. Her writing appears in such places as The Black Scholar, the National Political Science Review, Women, Gender, and Families of Color, Visual Arts Research, and Camera Obscura. Joining her tonight in conversation is Dr. Janice Johnson Dias. Professor Dias is a scholar, activist whose life work is developing research-informed, innovative solutions to the challenges facing the urban poor, particularly underserved Black mothers and their children. She is the author of Parent Like It Matters: How to Raise Joyful, Change-Making Girls. Dr. Wade is going to be reading at the very beginning an excerpt from the book, and then we're going to be moving into a conversation. So please join us in offering a warm welcome to Professors Ashleigh Greene Wade and Dr. Janice Johnson Dias. Welcome to City Lights. It is such a pleasure having you with us.
It's a pleasure to be here.
Yes,
I'm excited.
Thank you so much for having us here today to talk about Black Girl Autopoetics. This is my first monograph, and so I'm really excited to be able to share this with you all tonight. And there will be other opportunities for you to learn more about Black Girl Autopoetics through Duke University Press's website. The introduction is posted there if you want to take a read. So I'm going to start out by reading a little bit from the introduction, just as a way of giving you all a sense of how I came to this work. November 24th, 2016. I was back home in Kinston, North Carolina, visiting family for Thanksgiving at my maternal grandparents' house, the house that has been the center of our family functions since it was built in the 1950s. This Thanksgiving, it was unseasonably warm, even for Kinston, but the warmth was not the only unusual thing about that day. This particular Thanksgiving was the first one any of us had celebrated without our family matriarch, my grandmother, who died unexpectedly a couple of months before. So the mood was heavy, and we were still navigating the newness of her absence. As the day progressed, we eased into our normal traditions: the prayer, the meal, the conversations, the laughter. As much of a staple as the turkey, post-dinner activities involved the grown folks sitting in the kitchen talking, while the children, 5 girls ranging in age from 6 to 12, played outside. After being outside almost all afternoon, the girls came in the house excited to show us what they had been doing all day, making a video on Triller. So Triller was like the TikTok before TikTok. The song they chose as the backdrop of their production came from the viral "You Name It" meme, which featured an excerpt from Shirley Caesar's "Hold My Mule," set to a hip-hop beat by DJ Suede. Each girl had a part, and the oldest one edited the video to make the choreography flow seamlessly with the lyrics of the song in the background. Aside from thinking the finished product was incredibly cute, the video intensified my growing interest in the mundane nature of digital technologies in the lives of children living in the United States, and how the ubiquitous nature of these technologies shapes what it means to be a Black girl in this moment, a moment in which they do not have to wait for magazines or television networks and film production companies to produce the media they want to see. In fact, Black girls have the tools at their disposal to produce their own media, creating media as play, as communication, as an outlet. This book is about Black girls' everyday digital practices, what their digital content reveals about their everyday experiences, and how their digital productions contribute to a broader record of Black life. In the pages that follow, I weave together a series of stories of how Black girls create spaces and discourse through their digital media production. I don't present the digital or Black girls' digital content in general as a clear-cut example or avenue toward Black liberation. Instead, I present these stories as a provocation to reevaluate processes that are integral to Black life, space making, archiving, communicating, and organizing through the lens of Black girlhood. Black girls' digital practices constitute a means through which they invent and reinvent themselves, in turn, inventing and reinventing what it means to live, create, and preserve Black life. And so I want to talk a little bit about the definition or how I define Black girl autopoetics as we move into this conversation. And so I draw from Sylvia Wynter's concept of autopoiesis, which she describes as a way of naming and conceptualizing our experiences. And I define Black girl autopoetics as an inherently spatiotemporal praxis of creation. In breaking down autopoiesis to its roots, the word translates to self-making. I deploy the concept of self-making in two ways. Black girls making themselves, that is, making their subjectivities, and Black girls staking claim to a creative process that is their own, or making for themselves. I present Black girl autopoetics as a praxis of creation because it encompasses how Black girls reinvent cultural products, spaces, and discourses in their subjective formation and expression. Throughout the text, when I refer to Black girls' creativity, I do not mean this as a conflation with artistry, even though art is part of Black girls' creative repertoire. Instead, I use creativity to mean inclined towards creation. Black people have created and continue to create alternate new worlds within the worlds we were not meant to survive. Therefore, Black girl autopoetics functions as a world-making technology. It is both theory of the flesh and a survival methodology rooted in Black girls' ways of knowing and making meaning.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank everyone for being here. So I am going to serve as the discussant in conversation with Ashleigh about the book. Ashleigh, I want to begin by thanking you for inviting me to have this conversation with you. And I have this lovely copy of the book so you all can see what the book looks like. And I was jokingly saying at the beginning of the conversation is that it forced me to read an academic book again, since I am, I now sit at the intersections of academia and non-academia. So this book was a welcome treat, and I had to read it fairly quickly because we had today's conversation. So you talk about your work. I'm going to offer the audience a kind of a summary of the way that I experienced the work before I go in to have a conversation. And you just used all of the great academic words, right? You use praxis, really big academic word that people like to use. You have the phrase autopoetics, which is not necessarily like an everyday language, but I want to say to the audience in summarizing and thinking about this book is that I read this book as an opportunity. It offers a set of narratives, both autoethnography, your story, and the stories of a set of girls, Black girls, about how they are creating worlds and how they are negotiating spaces. And one of my favorite parts of the book is that you talk about the ways in which this is about being interconnected, being multi-layered, and it is an ongoing process of self-development and meaning-making. How is that is happening in this digital space in a way that we haven't seen it before? And while space has often been thought of as physical, the digital space is an opportunity, and girls have created that space as a meaning-making space, a space that helps them define and create themselves. In the book, some of my favorite parts is the way in which you interrogate what scholars have often talked about, right? Is that there is this dual realities for Black girls, which is both being hypervisible as well as being invisible at the same time. And so many of us know that, and you provide us rich example of hypervisibility and invisibility occupying in the same space, and how in the digital realm that becomes even more pronounced. For me, the book has great utility both within scholarship and beyond scholarship. And that's the way I kind of think about it. I think within scholarship, for me, one of the major significant contributions you make is around the methodological considerations and the notions of ethics. So Ashleigh gathers this information through several years and come to think about what does it mean to guard Black girls' privacies, right? One of the things that many of us know is that when you are invisible, right, and you're seeking to make yourself visible, is that you can relinquish privacies. And she goes through great lengths methodologically to make sure that she guards the privacy. And what she offers is something that those of us who teach research methods, where you have to make considerations of confidentiality, ethics, and privacy, is that what you contribute there, I think, is worthy of study for those of us who teach research methods, and is, in fact, I think, its own monograph on how do we manage and handle Black lives? What is the delicacies that are needed that exist beyond the IRB? And I think that that is a major contribution to the field that I hope that in some future iteration, you get a chance to thoroughly explore. I also think that you make an epistemological, right? So this is a contribution about, are Black girls worthy of study in and of themselves? Is there meaning making? Is there enough universality in Black life to make the subject, Black girls, a worthy consideration? And I think, yes, you make a case, and you make that case very forcefully and several times. I think beyond the academy, what I find this work, and this is probably going to be really the part of our conversation that digs in, is beyond the academy, the contribution of this work is that we know that Black girls are in this digital space, both as creators in the way that we think about digital creators that can be capitalized, make money off of, but also as offering us opportunities to see how they are self-making. How are Black girls deciding what is right for them and the way they want to be seen? How are they challenging notions of respectability? And what does that mean for us who are caretakers? Can we really handle it? Right? I can see in some of the participants here that we have a significant number of caretakers, right, and caregivers, and some of us can't handle it. Like, really, she's trying to make herself by showing the crack of her ass? That may not be the kind of meaning making that we into, right? And we might have strong feelings about that. So that is one thing that I think extends beyond the academy. Other features is even though it is only slightly explored in your book, and it is related to the crack of the ass comment, is Black girls' notion of expansive identities beyond the boundaries, right? So if we extend respectability, it's like, what does it mean to be a Black girl? There's often a search for a monolithic, homogeneous Black girl that is our Black girl. I happen to have one of those, right? And so there's often a sense of like crafting the Black girl we want.
Yeah.
And where is self-determination in it? You end the book in talking about Black futures, right? As really fine point, even though I think that is actually one of the aims of the book. Black girls are, in fact, the future. They are the reproductive future. They are the idea future. They are building their pathways. And a part of this contribution is, where are Black girls, their placement in the digital space? How is that being conceptualized in terms of how we're thinking about Black futures, right? Because Black futures is tied to this digital space as we see more generative AI, et cetera. And I can imagine what your work looks like as we begin to think about different types of avatars. What are Black girls selecting? Where they're trying to be. So for me, this book is a major contribution. I encourage folks to read it. I know that there's a lot of academic language in it, but there are several super accessible chapters and sections that invites conversation for us, those of us who have a Black girl in our life, who that Black girl is using the digital space, where we can begin to ask new questions of ourselves as we seek to constrain Black girls in order to create a future for them. So I want to thank you for the book, Ashleigh, and now I want to ask you some hard questions. All right. So why should we care?
Well, one of the reasons why we should care is because social media is here to stay. And we have a lot of, there's a lot of discourse about the challenges of social media, the ways that social media is impacting our young people, not just Black young people, but all young people. And so that's one reason why we should care, is because I think that if we're going to have a robust discourse about social media, we have to know the ways that young people are actually using social media beyond our assumptions about what they're doing on social media. The other reason why we should care is because for Black studies in particular, and when I say Black studies, I mean the academic field of Black studies, but also like more broadly thinking about like
the
Black
people who
life
are out here studying Black life.
Right,
and
exactly.
replicating and co-opting, right?
Exactly, exactly. So when we think about Black studies, I don't think that we can really have a full picture of Black life and Black experience if we're not looking at the experiences of Black girls and Black children in general. One of the things that I found in my research, starting at the level of the dissertation, was that so much of cultural studies research makes arguments about children or makes conclusions about children, but doesn't actually consult with children. And so I think that in order for us to have fuller archives of Black life and Black experiences, like we have to actually talk to Black girls and be in community with Black girls to understand how they are also recording their lives and documenting their experiences.
All right, so I want to build on that. So throughout the book, you come back to that phrase, documenting, and the phrase archives. And there's a clear investment in what this means for a preservation of Black realities, right? So we want to say, like, after some of us have died, right? Somebody's going to go back and they're going to say, look at Black life, right? And you are making this case like, hey, there were these little people called Black girls, and we should care because what happened to them and how they live can tell us something about understanding the Black experience, um, Black desires, Black presentation of self, Black determination, right? So you get me there, right? And you engage in this conversation about the need to document this because the absence of the documentation means that something is missing, right? And I want to make sure I'm representing your argument correctly. In that vein of Black girls are people, and they are people who contribute to Black life. I wonder if you could just talk to us a little bit more about what you thought was missing that this needed to fill. Do you, right? Like, yes, scholars don't talk to children, right? We know that one of the reasons, for those of you who don't know, one of the reasons scholars don't talk to children is that you have to get a bunch of approval to talk to children because they're a protected class and they can hold you up from getting tenure. And so you're just like, yo, I'm not going to talk to the kids. I'm just going to talk to the adults because I don't have no time for these kids and all of what it takes to get to the kids, right? So scholars have to get tenure like you, right? And so we go about our business and we're like, fucking kids, this is what we gonna do, right?
Right.
So that is a part of it. But you seem to be saying something different. You're saying that if we don't talk to Black girls, we are missing a part of understanding Black life. Is that your assertion? And how do you come to that assertion?
Yes, that is my assertion to answer the first part of that question. I come to that assertion through a few different experiences beyond my academic training. So the first experience was being a high school teacher. And I talk about this in a lot of my discussions of Black Girl Autopoetics and the research that I do. And so I noticed in teaching in both low income public school and a very affluent private school that the experiences of Black girls in both of those spaces wasn't all that different. Even though you would think that the school that had all these resources and just access to all kinds of opportunities, that Black girls would have a different sense of belonging within that type of environment. And so there was something that I was beginning to notice there about how Black girls experience their social worlds and experience their environments. And so I also started to realize that aside from my interest in how Black girls were using digital spaces, I started to think about how Black girls' experiences were symptoms of bigger problems in society. So the ways that they were experiencing a lack of belonging in schools or misunderstanding in school. And when I say misunderstanding, I mean a discrepancy between how they see themselves and how the adults around them see them. And so that was something that I wanted to explore deeper because I felt like there's something missing from our discussion of the Black experience if we're not looking at the unique position of Black girlhood and how their environments are creating these spaces where they are both seen as excessive and then also not seen at all. And so there's something, like I said, there's something specific about that experience that I feel like we have to capture if we're really going to understand what it means to be Black in this country and in spaces where Blackness is not valued and where girlhood is not valued as a whole.
All right. Okay, so let's say you convinced me of that. And why not just physical space? Why digital space?
Okay, so the reason why the reason why I became interested in digital space is because, again, tying back to these experiences and like working with high school students, I noticed that they did seem to find belonging in digital spaces. And so that made me wonder what it is about digital spaces that might be facilitating something that's not being facilitated in physical spaces. So an example that I talk about in the book is how my students at the second school where I taught, the private school where I taught, how they would talk to me about Snapchat because it was new at that particular time. And they would always, like, every day, like, have these like big adventures that they were, describing from what they were doing on Snapchat. But then they wouldn't actually like show me anything on Snapchat though. So like it was different because any other time, like with any other social media, they might come up to me and say, hey, look at this picture on, Facebook, or hey, look at this video on YouTube. They never came up to me and were like, hey, look at what I posted on Snapchat. So like that was also making me think like maybe these digital spaces are providing somewhere where they can just kind of be themselves and be free. And so I really wanted to think more about that, especially as an educator, because so much of what we hear as educators and what we talk about as educators is like how to keep children from using social media. And so especially at that time, it was like, oh, social media is like the devil, and like we have to make sure they're not on their phones. And I was just like, well, do we know what they're doing though? Like, or are we just assuming? So that's why I really wanted to look at the digital. So I think that there was also something there about digital space as being an opportunity or creating an opportunity for Black girls that might not necessarily be the case for physical space.
Okay. Well, I thought that you made quite a convincing case in the book about the possibilities for digital space. I want to come back to a point that you made regarding the role of adults in meaning making and self-determinations for Black girl. And while I wouldn't say we end the book thinking that you are some hyper advocate for Black girls on social media, you do make a provocative case that it's important for us to recognize that Black girls are charting, use the language of geographies and mapping, are charting new territories in order to better understand themselves. And that adults, though you don't cast us, right, old people like me, you don't cast us in some awful way, you do say like, our charting may be over. We may have, in fact, been fully anchored into the shore. So talk to me about the way you conceptualize, right? Talk to us a little bit, for those who, they haven't read the book, about what adults do in terms of anchoring Black girls that are positive, and what do adults do in terms of anchoring, which are sinking and not positive, and what we should make of this, right? And then do with it.
Yeah, so I think that some of the ways that adults anchor Black girls in ways that are positive is through encouraging Black girls to achieve. So for example, I talk a lot about girls who are activists or doing activist work. I talk about girls who are high achieving when it comes to like school. And I think that like it's important for us to support Black girls in those endeavors. And I think that it's also easy for us to support Black girls who are doing things that are deemed as traditionally respectable activities. I think that ways that adults anchor Black girls in ways that are not positive is through creating expectations for Black girls that don't allow them a kind of exploration of their identities, of their desires, of their ambitions, or maybe lack of ambition. So like, I think that's a way that we have a tendency to anchor Black girls in a way that is not positive. And I talk about this a lot in the third chapter of the book, where I'm really talking about Black girls' representations of themselves, or I frame it as representation. And so I talk about how a lot of times, because we do as adults, I think that in general, we do have a desire, especially people who are parents, have a desire to protect Black girls or shield them from certain types of dangers. But in that instinct to protect, I think some of that is rooted in a fear of like imagery, or like certain imagery, or like a fear of like transgressing the bounds of respectability. And I just think that rather than imposing respectability on Black girls, that we allow them to explore themselves in ways that they can come to be people that they can look at in the mirror and say, I love me, I accept me, I respect me.
Yeah. Okay, so I can hear the voices of all the Black parents are like, that's cute. Like, I really want you to make meaning of yourself. I really want you to feel represented, but these internet streets aren't safe, and people out here wilding out. And if you show the crack of your ass, how you gonna get a job or internship? What do you say to those people?
Yeah, so that came up in conversations that I was having with Black girls. So we talked a lot about, part of the reason why those kinds of questions came up is because when I would go and talk to girls like in school settings or like at summer camps, a lot of the people who were running those programs thought that I was like, that's what I was coming there for, to like talk to Black girls like, hey, don't post this, don't post that. But that's not where the conversation was necessarily going. And so Black girls actually are very astute about navigating those kinds of dynamics on social media. But I do think that there are ways that we can teach Black girls to be practical and smart about what they post on social media without villainizing them for their desires. So let me be a little bit more concrete about that.
Mhm.
So an example that came up during a discussion with some Black girls was about some people who attended a party, and they were talking about how they were afraid to like post pictures from the party because they didn't want like college recruiters or someone else to see those pictures and assume that something was happening that shouldn't have been happening, like drinking or doing drugs or something like that. And so they said that, while they chose not to post it on social media because they were thinking about those things, they also said that they wouldn't judge someone else who posted that on social media. And one thing that I talk about specifically, because you brought up the example about, someone showing their ass crack on social media,
Yeah,
like
that's always the phrase. It's always crack a ass. I hope you
right.
understand.
Right. So, and I do talk explicitly about Black girls' sexual expression on social media. And so while I think that there are, certain ways that you have to be real with yourself about like, okay, if I post this publicly, there's a chance that it could spread and someone that I don't want to see might see it. I think we also have to be honest about that stage of development and that stage of sexual development. So like, I think that's a hard conversation for us to have, because we don't want Black girls to make themselves susceptible to certain types of judgment and scrutiny. But at the same time, a lot of that is not really, it's not really, in my opinion, rooted in protection. It's rooted in like, how does that look? You know, it's rooted in the
Okay.
gay.
All right. So all right. So we supposed to be in the living room talking, right? So like, here's what I hear you say. You're saying, yes, safety is real, right? Black girls who, and I'm assuming persons under 18 with underdeveloped brains, are asked to be practical about, girl, if you show the crack of your ass, you know, you gotta, the L might be yours, right? And people might judge you and they might talk about you, right? And what I hear you say is the challenging space that puts us in, right? Like, we want the discovery of the error, but in a country that is racist and in practices that are unfair, how are people to navigate the space between liberatory self and structural constraints, right? And you don't give us any answer, because you said you wrote the book for provocation, not for necessarily implementation. But I think those of us who are caregivers, we want to know, well, what should I do then? I want her to be herself, to make meaning, but I really don't want to see the crack of her ass on the people's internet.
Yeah.
So what are you going to help us do other than provoke, Ashleigh? Like, what can we say? Walk me through a conversation of like, hey, little Janice, I know you want to be who you want to be, but please don't have the crack of your ass on the internet. Is that what I should be saying?
I mean, something along those lines, I think is fine. I think the important piece though for me is that I think when we're having these conversations with Black girls about what they probably should not post online, is to emphasize that the reason is not because there's something inherently wrong with them or inherently wrong with their desires or the way that they desire to express themselves. But instead, we have to frame it as like, there's a way that you are being read as a Black girl
Okay, I
that
have to
is
interrupt
not
you because I'm
okay.
telling you that parents think that anybody who wants to show their ass on the internet, there's something wrong with that desire.
Okay,
So,
so
right, like that, let us, like, these are Black folks, right? Like, Black
yeah,
folks, these are young Black girls attached to Black people. And you know, a part of a set of conversations is that, why do you need, right?
right.
So in your book, you do have the answer. Why do you need to show yourself this way? And you, Ashleigh, have written a book that says there is a reason why Black girls need. So tell us, because those of us who may be on here, we might think it's some perverse thing. We might think that it is some, you know, we have different ways of talking about Black desires, but you have explained to us there is a reason why Black girls want to show themselves in this particular way.
Yeah, so I do talk about how Black girls are um wanting to show themselves in this particular way. And first, I just want to be clear that we're not talking about like all Black girls,
No,
right?
no, no,
But
no, no. We
I
are
do,
not talking about all
but
Black girls. But why do
but
Black girls want this freedom?
right. So for the girls who are, you know, like interested in like expressing themselves in these particular ways, it's about it's about not it's about refracting or like throwing back the gaze in a way. So it's like basically a way of Black girls expressing their own agency, or like being basically saying like, this is who I am, and wanting to define themselves for themselves without the external, without the external impositions of respectability or without the ways that people are scrutinizing them and judging them. So it's about self-definition, which is a key tenet of Black feminism. Although I don't think that the traditional Black feminists that I cite in my text would necessarily agree with Black girls, posting sexual images online. But yeah, it's about self-definition and agency and expression within these spaces. Also, I mean, adolescence is a period of sexual exploration. Like, we cannot lie to ourselves about that. And so how Black girls, I mean, it's a hard thing to think about.
I mean, it's a lie we tell. It's a lie we tell.
It is a lie we tell. But when we think about our own adolescence, I think, we can, maybe have some humbling thoughts.
Have you met a parent? Parents aren't, that's not our thing. We have recasted ourselves as being pure in our childhood.
Right, exactly. I know. So yeah, but I think that, it's really important I talk in that third chapter specifically, I talk about Black girls making themselves hyper visible in this particular way as a way of them refusing like other people's definitions and expectations of who they are as Black girls and who they are supposed to be as Black girls.
All right, so let's step back out a little bit more away from the crack of the ass to the conversation, this broader conversation of meaning making, right? Because that's actually what one of your core thesis is, that Black girls are using a digital space for this interconnection, for this meaning making, for this exploration. And there are provocative pictures, sure, but there are these other things that space invites. So for those who are here, what are some of the other ways in which Black girls are using it? So some are reconciling how their physical self shows up, but there are other ways.
Right. Yeah. So some of the things that I talk about in terms of thinking about how Black girls are using this space as a representational space is how some Black girls are using it as a space to assert body positivity against unrealistic beauty standards, especially now when there's so much pressure, I think, for girls and women to alter their bodies to fit particular shapes or particular sizes. And so that's one way that Black girls are using this space as a space of assertion that they are enough the way that they are and they don't have to change their bodies. Other ways that Black girls are using this space, they're using it for community building. So one of my favorite conversations occurs in the first chapter of the book when I'm talking about like Black girls' geographies and how they are layering spaces based on their experience in both the physical world and the digital world. And the girls were talking about how they found like-minded people in these digital spaces in the absence of having that like at school, for example, because a lot of them went to schools where they might have been one of, 3 Black people in their whole grade. And so they use these spaces to build community. Some of the girls that I talked to were also questioning their like sexuality or sexual orientation. And so they also were able to find community online to help in support of accepting themselves. And then also Black girls are using these spaces to make the world better, not just their individual lives, but to do community work, like to do work in communities, to raise awareness about issues that are impacting Black girls in their hometowns, Black girls across the country and across the world. So there are all kinds of ways that Black girls are using these digital spaces, not only for self-expression, but also just in general in ways that show their agency, and how they can use these tools towards their own purposes.
Yeah. So this idea of Black girls' agency, right? The capacity to determine for yourself, I think is related to the concept. You build out the concept of representation.
Mhm.
And you talk about the ways in which Black girls feel unmirrored, and that there is this fight for mirroring. Anybody who's on here who's aware of me knows about my daughter Marley and her desire to have Black girl books that mirrors her, and offer multiple types of stories, not just the good stories, but ones that are heterogeneous that do all the rest of those things. This notion of representation and mirroring, the thing that I found really profound in that discussion is the heavy desire for representation. I would argue that Marley's own desire to see Black girl books is a very specific American conceptualization, both in structure and in and as an individual, right? So what I call the 13% problem of having so few Black Americans in the country, and furthermore, the necessity to strive for and wanting to see yourself so much, right? And I think that that is practiced by majority culture so much, right? Majority culture gets to see themselves. This group of Black folk in this country don't get to see themselves. And you are taking on the conversations about representation as important in a digital space. Talk to us about that, and give the audience a little bit about how that shows up and what the digital space has to offer for issues of representation.
Yeah, so I think one of the really generative things about digital spaces, and especially social media, or like spaces where people are creating their own content to post online, is that they don't have to wait for someone to tell their story. Like, they can tell their own story. And I think about this a lot in how Black girls use social media in relation to my own experiences growing up with a lack of media representation, particularly in the types of media that I was consuming. So I used to like to read magazines, and especially like teen magazines. And so, but there were rarely Black girls in those magazines. And I only remember one example of a dark-skinned Black girl in any of those magazines that I used to read. So, and it was detrimental, I think, to my concept of like what feeling like I was important, or feeling like my story was like worthy to be told. And I think that digital media decreases that for Black girls in our contemporary moment, because they don't have to wait to see themselves printed in a magazine, or wait to see their story, in a book, or wait to see their story in a movie. They can make their own stuff and share it with each other. And so they're creating these new representational frameworks that they have control over, without having to, write letters to the producer
Editor.
to, put more Black girls on this show, or write letters to the editor to put more Black girl stories in the magazine. So I think that is one of the, like I said, most generative qualities of digital media for representation of Black girlhood.
Well, I thank you. I know that I'm looking at the time. I definitely want to say it has been a pleasure. You have definitely left me. I have had conversations, written a little bit about social media and Black girls' engagement with it, particularly my own daughters. My daughter has written about her engagement with social media. I value folks who are willing to say that our histories are incomplete if we do not consider the perspectives of Black girls. One of the key takeaways from your book for me is that you don't essentialize Black girlhood, which I find is a common practice among scholars. And for those of you, what that means is that there's one way to be a Black girl. A lot of Black girlhood studies still seem to pull towards there's one way to be good and Black. And this book disrupts that. The push to autonomy, which I feel like is a consideration, a practical consideration. What does it mean for Black girls to be autonomous given their youth and given their vulnerability in the society? I think a lot of people are really struggling with these questions. And this, I think, while it doesn't necessarily give an answer, it does raise, you do provocate a lot of questions that have great utility beyond the academy. So I encourage people to pick up the book who want to figure out, they know that they shouldn't constrain too much, but are trying to come up with questions and to co-create answers with Black girls, which is my suggestion. I think your book does that quite nicely, and I hope that it has tremendous success and a lot of people do buy it. I know we're going to take questions in a few seconds, but I wanted to know if you had any closing thoughts or comments about your own work before we take questions from folk.
I just want to say that one of the most important things to me about this book and about this research was being in community with Black girls. And I really approach my research as learning from Black girls and learning with Black girls. And so I hope that that spirit of like Black girls as my collaborators comes through in the book.
Okay, all right. So I will check the chat, but I think we have enough of a space that if you want to ask a question, you only need to raise your hand and we will take your questions. So if you have a question, you can put it in the chat or you can raise your hand and we can call on you. I've asked Ashleigh a lot of questions and I have this little sheet with more questions. Okay, all right. Edwina.
Yes, thank you so much, Dr. Wade, and for providing such great research. I too have the concern that with the IRB, there were so many passionate subjects that you just really could not dig deeper into, such as, for instance, I'm a passionate person about the homeless. So when it comes to your research, where exactly do you see your work going in terms of a more federal conversation that's like a national conversation? And if there is one person at the White House that you can take your research to, who would that be?
I'll answer the first question in terms of where do I see my research going. So this book, as Janice pointed out in our conversation, is really meant to be a provocation. So I feel like the next step is going to be more application. And so really working with Black girls and Black youth in general to kind of reimagine and reshape, reconfigure some of these digital spaces, because the way that they are right now, like, yes, Black girls are, making do, but the spaces themselves can also be better in terms of how they are impacting Black girls and in terms of what the capacity for them. The second question about who would I talk to at the White House about my project, I don't know that I would I don't know that that's where I would start with
I
trying
will
to.
do it for her though. I think Jennifer Klein and the women, the women on policy group that is left over. I think that a lot of this issue, the central issues of autonomy and agency still does not exist. Large NGOs and CBOs are still framing and hyper-framing Black girls' voices and then recasting and reshaping it. And that space is still not a liberatory space. And if this book does anything, it invites us to expand rather than retract Black girls' voices.
Thank you. There's a question in the chat that says, what is the role of humor in Black girls' voices? So I think humor is very important. I talk a lot about Black girls' humor, Black girls' play, Black girls' friendships, where they're like laughing and like joking around with each other, because I think that that's so important for humanizing Black girls and also helping us to like see them as actual girls, right? Like, because I think there's such a tendency to adultify Black girls and look at them as, you know, women before they become women. And I think humor really helps us to see them as girls, like just having fun and being carefree, being joking, playing around. So humor is very important in Black girls' voices.
And there's a good discussion in the book about Black girls showing pictures of their friends, wanting to take pictures together as representation, as a form of humanity. And so there's some rich paragraphs in there regarding that. Any more questions? Amina, an actual Black girl.
Hi, yeah, I am a sophomore at NYU studying sociology and English. And I had a question. I've yet to read the book, but how do you imagine the role of Afrofuturism and works like Black Panther in the transformation of imagery for Black girls on social media in the future? Like, I know for me as a Black girl, having Black Panther, and especially Black Panther 2 with it being a female lead superhero, I saw a lot of imagery about that and it really changed my mind, but I'm really interested to hear what your perspective on that will be.
Yeah, thank you for that question. I do talk about Black girl futures in the book in terms of thinking about how Black girl autopoetics is a tool for imagining and building Black girl futures. And so while I don't talk specifically about Afrofuturism in this particular book, not in an extensive way, I have given a talk before where I look at Black Panther, for example, and another film called Brown Girl Begins, which is a Canadian film. And I talk about how the way that Afrofuturism is like visualized in these media texts, as well. And I talk about the Shuri comic series as well, and how like Afrofuturism is envisioned in these particular texts, and how that really gives us almost like a concrete example of what Black girl futures can look like, especially if we allow Black girls to have spaces where they can be imaginative, where they can tinker with things. Like I think about Shuri's character in the Black Panther, for example, where like she just has all this time to devote to studying, right? And perfecting these technologies. And so like I think that those types of Afrofuturist texts really give us clues about what Black girls need to build sustainable futures, not only for themselves, but also for their communities.
right? We have a thing. I wonder how the two of you with your expertise in Black girls and parenting would answer this question together. Oh, how do we balance supporting the empowerment and self-determination Black girls build for themselves and one another through social media with our responsibilities as parents to teach them about social expectations that, for better or worse, are placed upon them? All right, you go, Ashleigh.
Okay, I would say that, well, first, I want to clarify that I don't know that I would consider myself an expert in Black parenting because I am not a parent. But I do think that part of what I try to address in the work is this very tension that you're bringing up between the wanting to empower Black girls and wanting them to be autonomous, but also recognizing that there are, limitations within the society that we live in terms of like how and when and where they might express these kinds of um autonomy, or like how what they see as empowering might not necessarily be read in that way. And I think that what I try to strike a balance by saying that it is okay to, teach Black girls about the dangers of um the dangers of posting certain things on social media, the dangers of like being in certain physical spaces. But I think in those conversations, it's just extremely important to emphasize that those dangers don't exist because Black girls themselves are a problem. They exist because of racism, sexism, etc.
So I wrote about this in my book about this tension, and I'm fairly consistent with my opinion, even though I have more to my opinion, and I have opinions that are appropriate for this book talk, and then out-of-pocket opinions. So I'm going to try to give you the within-pocket opinion. So the advice I give to parents directly in my book is that you want to develop your child before they interface with the tool that is social media. And that development means that they are native to technologies and you are not. And in that development, you need to create a space for them to be in dialogue with you. Social media spaces are, in fact, private spaces in much regard, and everyone has to be invited into a particular world. And what happens often is that our children are out there and they are in the wild, wild west of it, and we have no idea what that world is like. We don't know how to use our phones. We don't know how these technologies work. We don't know what a follow, a like, a friend, a Finster. We don't even have the language to negotiate, so then we can't talk to them what they're experiencing. I think about safety in two ways, typically. I think about physical safety and I think about emotional safety. And so both of these things are considerations for engagement with social media. Children can be tagged, geolocated, and be made physically unsafe. Children can also be physically taken care of safely, but they can be bullied, they can be DM'd things, people can see them, and it's not just strangers. Much like the other forms of harm is that people within their own social sphere can harm them from what they post, beyond people unliking or unfollowing. So I think that the framework for the negotiation needs to happen before engagement with social media. And I think once social media occurs, we need to be in a relationship, right, such that you can be invited in, right? And that there are rules of invitation. Yes, your girl may ask you, say it's okay and accept you as a friend or as a follower, but she doesn't want you commenting on her pictures. She doesn't want you following her friends. And that's a level of giving up of authority that many caregivers are unwilling to do, especially Black mamas and Black aunties. And so I think that while this conversation is about digital space, there's a lot of work that has to be done prior to that engagement that makes digital spaces a welcoming space for girls to do self-discovery. Shelby, I hope I answered your question. All right. Okay, Lisa, how do you view the impact of how Black girls internalize visuals and ways of being, and what should be like or don't like, or like when they review content on social media, right? So I think the question is about internalizing visuals and some of the consequences of internalizing certain visuals and rejection of certain visuals.
So I think that there's definitely an impact of Black girls internalizing certain visuals, not just on social media, but within visual media in general. And I think part of what has to happen is similar to the answer that you just gave, Janice, about developing girls before they even interact with digital media and digital spaces. So I think part of that is about having conversations with Black girls about issues of body image, issues of also like how a lot of the visual images that we see are not even real. So like they are modified in ways that make people look very different from how they look in real life. So I think media literacy is also a way to challenge some of the negative internalization of certain types of visual images. But I also think that that's one of the ways that social media can be impactful too when Black girls are making their own media, because if they are representing themselves and sharing those representations with each other, then I think that also creates a sense of being in community with people who are actually like you, as opposed to trying to be like someone that you don't know and you see, this image of them on social media. But that is it is a complex thing when we're talking about like development and body image, because it's something that once you start struggling with it, it's an ongoing struggle. Like it's hard to really break out of that pattern of comparison.
I also think it's recursive. Here I will just add is that there is images being made, images having an imprint, images being created, and they're having their own imprint. So, right, so that this recursive process, this back and forth, right, during these key developmental years, it's something that we have to confront really head on, right? Is that, again, for me, the idea is that we have to teach our young people, especially Black girls, very early to reject a set of things and to embrace very, very discrete and very specific things. And that hater's eye, I think is really foundational for protecting Black girlhood, and really important for the discovery of themselves, is that there are many ways to be Black and girl, and anything that feels too constraining, Black girls need to learn very early on, and that is the charge of the caregiving circles around them, is that they should reject that. Is that if we want Black futures, if we want Black liberty, if we want Black autonomy, which we should want, I think that this book and this conversation reminds us that given more space is the way to go, and laying a different foundation than the one that have been laid for us is going to be an important way forward. All right. So thank you all for your time. Ashleigh, thank you. I am wishing you great success with this book. Good people, there are links in the comments for buying the book. You can buy Ashleigh's book. You certainly can buy my book. You should buy my book. You should also listen to it on Audible. But we are here tonight to talk about Ashleigh's work and to provoke you into conversations and activities that can help us all reach towards greater forms of liberty. So thank you, thank you, thank you.
Thank you.